Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Lydia. So, what I'd like to do, Cameron, we can put up the slides. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the recent changes to PCI DSS. And this is specifically for the public sector agencies and municipalities. I see we have a couple of attendees from public universities as well. Anyone that is really handling payment information, this should be relevant to you. So we're going to be talking about 4.0.1, newest, latest, and greatest. And for our agenda today, we are going to be just doing a very quick walkthrough of PCI DSS. We assume there's probably some base knowledge here, but we'll be talking about where we are in the new requirements and their sunrise into becoming codified within the standard, as well as some of the things that maybe you don't have the history and context of how these requirements sometimes come to be. And then we'll go into some of the challenges specifically in the public sector. We'll talk about a passion of mine, the role of automation as well as threat intelligence within all of our security tools. We'll talk about how important it is to meet compliance with trusted third parties such as human. We'll talk about some of the architecture and integration, and then end with what I like to do is share some of my learnings over the 20 plus years of being involved with PCI, strategies for minimizing effort while actually increasing the security posture of your payment environment. And then after that, hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers as well. So starting with, we'll go on to talk about what is PCI DSS. And I can give this history because I was there in the very beginning. So I was working at American Express. I established the data security operative policy, which is the equivalent of American Express. And at that time, I was also working a lot of merchant data compromises. I would investigate and do post for analysis on compromised merchants. I would look at to see what were some of the leading factors that possibly we could look to see is there controls in place or missing that we could encourage. And so that's where I always think about PCI DSS. I then went on to become one of the first employees. I was held several executive titles from chief technology officer, chief standards architect, and oversaw the development of the standards for about 15 years, the team that led that. And for me, I've always looked at what are we trying to accomplish in the attempt to grow and increase the number of controls that have to be managed. And typically it is always where's the biggest pain point that we saw with financial fraud, with the payment exposure, the data exposure. And so you saw several times when early versions of the PCI DSS standard, you would see a lot of rogue IP Wi-Fi that was being compromised. So there was an emphasis in early days around making sure that there was a secure firewall and web application firewall to prevent some of these rogue access points. And then as we matured, you got into 2017, 2018, and all of a sudden you start to see the use of e-skimming. We started to have the chip migration happening earlier in the US. Obviously, it happened much earlier in other parts of the world. And then all of a sudden the shift to e-commerce, not only was e-commerce becoming a common use even within government and public sector, but we were starting to see just as it became more populous, that target was being increased by all of these malicious actors. So as a result, we started looking at e-skimming. So if you attended any of the PCI events, you would have probably seen my keynote where I talked about the coming of e-skimming attacks, why this was important. In the 2018, we were starting to see major companies being compromised by third-party software that was present on their website and starting to extract this information. And so then it started to become a reality. We needed to put this into our standards. Even to this day, we see that the 2023, 2024 forensic reports from a variety of different sources still say that the vast majority of compromises are due to, especially in the retail sector, is because of some type of web application attack, and either misconfigurations or this reliance on a third party and not validating that information. So it became part of the requirements. And we usually, when there is a new radical requirement that's introduced, we typically give 18 or more months to have entities be able to identify what is the budget planning inclusion of this methodology into their security strategy. So now if you look on the screen, we have really at the end of this timeline that has been promoted for over 3 years, which is in March 31st of this year. Now all of these future data requirements are going into effect. And with that, Cameron, I am going to turn it over to you to maybe talk a little bit specifically about the requirements that are really pertinent to us. But before I do that, probably worthy of mentioning, are you ready? We're going to do a little poll within our group here today and ask, is your organization ready for these new requirements and the overall standard of 4.0.1? That's coming into effect March 31st. So please feel free to answer yes, somewhat, or no, and we will post those results very soon. And with that, Cameron, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thanks a lot, Troy. That's a really great intro onto the background of PCI and kind of how we got to where we are today. So to your point, we're going to talk about some of the challenges for public sector when it comes to meeting the PCI DSS standards. Um, Essentially, first off, I mean, if you're taking payments online, right, whether it be payments for tuition, parking fees, taxes, all of those things that, local government, education might be doing beyond online retail, you are going to be in scope of this, right? So this is broadly impacting the industry. And I think it's for good reason. To Troy's point, when you look at how the fraud was being done, the browser side, the client side attacks were really the largest attack surface. And I really, applaud the PCI Council for being first with these client side runtime controls out of a lot of the other standards publishers out there. So to that end, what are these new standards, right? The two new technical requirements to be aware of are going to be 6.4.3, which focuses in on script management. And then we also have 11.6.1, which focuses primarily on HTTP security headers. What the council is asking folks to be able to do is confirm that scripts are supposed to be there through an authorization or deny workflow. They want to ensure that the script's integrity has not been compromised, so there's a change control on that. And then they want organizations to be able to maintain an inventory with justification for the scripts that are running on payment pages, just so that it proves that they're fully aware of what's running, why it's running, and the risk associated with running that potential third-party script. Then along with 11.6.1 around change and tamper detection of HTTP headers, same thing there, but again, just closing another attack vector. That is leveraged quite heavily for fraud. Troy, anything I'm leaving out there? Anything you need to keep me honest on?
No, I think that's important. Obviously, there's been updates and FAQs that the PCI Council continues to publish and talk about. In fact, I'll be hosting the PCI Council for an additional webinar that they'll be giving some updates. But I think, Cameron, you've hit the nail on the head. I think this is these were the two. There's other requirements. I should point out. There's probably about over 55. I think the number might even pass 60. But the key is that all of these have been best practices. So even if you were meeting PCI DSS 4.0 in 2024, understand that these requirements could have been looked at and hopefully discussed with you, but they are new requirements even to a standard that's been out there for a couple of years. So I think you've tackled these, and there's a few others in the policy area too. I'd emphasize are important new requirements, but these are ones that are among the top more radical changes that people need to be aware of. Nice job on covering these two.
Perfect. So, who's impacted by this? Primarily, it's going to be your level one, level two PCI folks that are going to be most impacted. However, the PCI Council did announce some changes to folks that fall under SAQA. So, just as a quick review, what are the different SAQ levels or self assessment questionnaire levels? SAQA is for merchants who've outsourced all of their cardholder data functions. SAQA-EP is more for your e-commerce merchants who've outsourced payment processing to a third party. And then I'm going to kind of skip down to SAQD because those are really the kind of the three that we find most people fall under when we're talking to them. But really, again, SAQD is just for merchants who store, process, or transmit cardholder data electronically. So with this, again, these slides will be available. This information will be available after the webinar today. But again, I mean, this is a big change to the entire market of what folks were used to, self-assessing on in previous iterations. Now, some of the specific modifications here are going to be you have to have the criteria for merchants that confirm that their site is not susceptible to attacks from scripts that could affect the merchant's e-commerce systems. Right. So this is basically doing that 6.4.3 requirement, excuse me, where they're basically ensuring that all of the scripts running have been inventoried. If new scripts become present, they're accounted for. And then all scripts that are running have a form of tamper protection to ensure that there are no unbeknownst updates, i.e. Potential supply chain attacks down the road. Part 2 here, removal of the PCI requirements of 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. Those requirements really just mean that the smaller merchants who qualify for SAQA will no longer need to comply with 6.4.3 and 11.6.1 directly, but they still will need to be able to prove that, again, scripts are not being tampered with and that there is a documented inventory. So with that, I think it's good to maybe ask another polling question here. Does your organization understand 100% of what PCI DSS requires? Again, that'll be a yes, somewhat no for folks, and we'll post those answers here shortly. All right. Yeah, it looks like almost nobody, yeah, in fact, nobody said yes. There were a few somewhats, 63% somewhat, and then 38% no. Honestly, about where I kind of expected a lot of folks to be. I was hoping to maybe see a couple more yeses, but I'm not mad that I don't see any yeses because I think it really shows that people are being mindful about this.
Well, and Cameron, I will add, for many years, probably since 2010, there was some dramatic shifts in the number of controls and expectations for meeting the standard. But from a 2010, we had a few areas of focus. A lot of it was more on scope in trying to reduce that, looking to shift out of archaic and deprecated encryption methodologies. But this is no surprise because 4.0 was at a time a very necessary shift away from there had just been small incremental changes for about a decade. And so there was obviously a lot that had happened in that time, a lot more with cloud service dependencies. We haven't even really had 4.0 touch on AI yet. So I'm not really surprised by these results because, and I saw the earlier answer was somewhat as well. To me, that is a very fair assessment because the volume of new requirements or change to requirements, and even the methodology, right? So we've allowed for all of these customized requirements, so you can do the traditional way and test to how the PCI Council recommends the design of a testing to make sure that the controls but also have this way of a customized approach that allows for an organization to I understand what the risk you're trying to attempt. I will create my own control, my own testing validation, and demonstrate possibly to an assessor that I'm meeting the spirit of the requirement, but doing it by a different, maybe avant-garde way that is not traditional security compliance. And so I think that it really is a fair assessment that a lot of people are still, even though it goes into effect in just a month's time, still trying to grasp all of these new changes that are coming.
Well, and I think you're touching on a pretty important point there of just how much the threat landscape has changed,
Mhm.
over time. So maybe this is a good point to hand this back over to you to kind of cover some of those new threats there, Troy.
Yeah, happy to, and also maybe opportunities to address those threats. And if we can go to the next slide, Cameron, I'll jump into what we're seeing specifically in the public sector itself. So we see that consistently over many years that government agencies are a top three targeted site for ransomware, and looking at ways to find cracks, because unlike maybe a small retail business, there is so much data beyond just payment data that could be compromised. So it may be that your PCI environment is not just that, but it has to consider privacy laws. It has to consider healthcare information that may be within or close proximity to that same environment. So we see this consistently as a warning, and a report from the FBI saying this is consistently a top three. We see the cost continues to rise, and we see about a 15 to 20% rise year over year of what the cost is. In 2024, according to CIT, that cost was $9.5 million. Obviously, a lot of municipalities do not have that type of coverage. I just spoke with the CISO of a large municipality who said that their insurance broker no longer carries them. It just became unfeasible, just the premiums. And so now they're saying, oh, well, I don't know how we're going to actually manage if that actually compromise were to take place. And then we also see that more security incidents, 20%, the total of all incidents and breaches, were linked to the public sector, again, according to Verizon's data breach and incident response report. And so we recognize that with these teams that sometimes have a smaller staff and are being inundated with potential attacks, that there is this need for automation and threat intelligence to counter. And you mentioned, Cameron, newer types of attacks. Everyone loves talking about Gen AI. We should be. It is radically changing our world. That's what I do a lot of my research on today. But at the same time, we recognize that we have now enabled all of these people that did not have the technical acumen to create malware. We have Fraud GPT, Worm GPT, Wolf GPT, all these transformers, the GPTs that can create malicious software and actually do very specific attacks against an organization. So if you are a municipality and you have, or an agency, and you have just one customer that is very disgruntled, and we all have customers that are disgruntled, they have the means now to be able to create a very specialized attack against your architecture. So with that, we recognize that the National Vulnerability Database that we monitor and start to enumerate all of these different vulnerabilities, even the massive number of vulnerabilities it does recognize and have us track, it's just becoming so difficult because the malware is becoming very polymorphic, right? It changes and can change specifically for an agency, for a specific entity. And so with that, we do need to be thinking about automation and threat intelligence. We need to have this ability to investigate and remediate in real time. And what we found is that real time response is actually a very cost-effective way. We see that the cost to respond to an incident improves significantly, 25% or more. So that's if we take that number of 9.5 or approximate around there. Other sources like Verizon has said that it's saving organizations about $2.2 million to have a faster root cause analysis, to be able to aggregate all of this information together to find these anomalies and be able to respond in an automatic fashion. And so what we're trying to do is do all of these practices that really minimize the errors, the manual errors. So the misconfigurations, looking at taking and trying to support each other, having all these different organizations share information about what they're seeing. You have the retail and hospitality ISAC, you have FS ISAC for the financial services, and doing all of this type of sharing of information to hopefully find where there's this consistent type of attacks happening. And all this to say that we do think that there is this attempt of a compliance fatigue that happens when someone has to be the one behind that, and where we do see opportunities for solutions like human and for in general Gen AI is to be able to minimize the redundant type of activities. So you don't have this compliance fatigue. You have the ability to manage your infrastructure in a way that humans are still needed. The oversight is absolutely needed, but they're not just able to manage such a complex, dynamically changing world. It reminds me of a compromise. When we first started the PCI Council, I was told in 2007, 2008, there was a compromise. They went into the data center where the compromise had happened and say, why weren't you monitoring your logs? And they said, no, we are. And they escorted the forensics teams to a back little closet room, and there was a man sitting down eating a sandwich, and thousands and thousands of lines of log reports were being sent across his screen, and with no human ability to read a single line. They say, here's proof that we are monitoring all of the logs in our data center. And so that's where I feel we are at again in 2024, 2025, having this just lack of comprehension of how quickly AI is creating more malicious actors and malicious code, and the volume that brings, and our ability to respond. So that's where I think automation and threat intelligence really is going to play an important role for everyone going forward.
Gotcha.
And with that, I'll get off my soapbox a little bit. I might come back to it in our strategy section, but with that, let's go to the next slide, Cameron.
No, sounds good. So yeah, you bring up a lot of points. The barrier to entry is so much lower today with Gen AI. Everything's custom and polymorphic. So how do you get ahead of this stuff, right? And that's really where human kind of shines. So human's approach leverages what we call real user monitoring and defense. So what we do is we will actually deploy a script, which is right here in our cons, to a website. That script will automate the inventory and management of all third-party, nth-party scripts on a site and on those payment pages, as well as the security headers. It's very easy to set up and maintain, right? So it doesn't take a lot of hand-holding. And on top of that, we also have the ability to provide real-time precision level mitigation. And that makes it very hard to evade for the attackers. In other words, what we're doing is we're making sure that every time someone loads up a website, we're there and trying to understand key pieces of that interaction of that transaction. With that, human directly addresses requirements 6.4.3 and 11.6.1 and provides automation and workflow support to meet the policy requirements within PCI DSS 4.0. We really strive to streamline, your payment page script and header management. We try to secure you beyond the PCI DSS 4.0 specific standard callout by providing things like real-time precision mitigation. And then we really allow you to gain visibility, unleash your true business, and overall, this is what security is really about, is reduce risk. All right. So how are we going to enable teams to do that? We're going to provide tooling and capability that allows folks to very quickly understand where are they in their compliance journey. So we'll show you how many scripts on a particular page or application are unreviewed, how many are in progress, what is your overall compliance process, or how compliant are you as it relates to the new PCI requirements. We'll then give you a breakdown by requirement so that, again, teams that are looking at 15, 20 different tools a day, 15, 20 different dashboards a day, they need something intuitive. And we try to make that very intuitive by simply calling out the requirements right within our workflow. We'll then show you, hey, here are the scripts that need to be reviewed. And we'll try to provide you some initial details so that you can understand, what is this script doing? Should I authorize it? Who's the vendor? And then what's the risk associated with that? Now, if we were unsure from here, we could click into a script and we could see some other key pieces of information about that script. So we'll see, what is the script justification? What are some vendor details? In other words, what is this Google Analytics script trying to do? Is this script currently authorized, unauthorized, changed? What is its status? And then we'll give you that information for your full script inventory. Now, beyond that, within each individual script, we will also provide the abilities to show you the full audit history as required by the PCI Council. So we'll show you when a script is first detected as a new script. We'll then show you when that script was authorized, any authorization note that was present, as well as who authorized that change within the organization. And then we'll show you when those scripts become modified. And if those scripts are modified in a malicious way, we'll immediately call that out so that you have the situational awareness to understand, hey, there's a modified script detected, which on its own should be an alert. But this script is more important to look at first versus another alert, because this script change is specifically trying to access password fields or credit card information. So now, when an organization is struggling with limited incident response personnel, because everybody has limited budget, right? They can get to what matters first and have the confidence to know that what they're responding to matters the most right now. Now, with that, I also mentioned that we have the ability to do some automation here. So, compliance is a lot of work, but there are some cases where you can automate that compliance approval workflow. One easy example of this would be, hey, if this is a developer-only first-party script that we use and we develop and maintain internally, we can then automatically authorize that script with a pre-auth code, if you will, right? And that way we're kind of tuning down the noise that your teams are going to have to respond to. We can automate the benign stuff, right? But then when, an actual third-party script is modified, alert to those changes more quickly and really draw your attention where it needs to be. On the flip side of that, though, and this is where we get into the precision mitigation, which is actually one of our key differentiators against others in this space, is we have the ability to proactively protect specific fields on a web form. So, for example, if you just want to get ahead of all of this, you're fully on board with the spirit of the PCI DSS 4.0 changes, you understand the security value that's present behind them, maybe you would come into our solution here and just simply say, hey, when a script tries to access the credit card or the card number fields, I want to automatically just block that access. Now, this is actually a really cool workflow for us at Human because it doesn't mean that we block the whole script, which can break a website. What we do instead, and this is why we call it precision level mitigation, is we block the script's ability to access that field that it called that is now protected, and we return an undefined value to that script. So the script still runs, the website still functions, the transaction still processes, but the script that was going to then, attempt to leak PCI data, cardholder data, is shut out of accessing any data of value. So, are there any questions so far in the chat about anything I've covered so far? Anybody have any comments?
No questions yet.
All right. Well, then
I will say, Cameron, just as we put up this poll, you talked about this creating policy, and I've seen a recent survey by Google and others that recognize that the number one area of automation is exactly what you're describing, is a way to automate the development of these policies for the roles and administrative rights. And this is a growing problem. Microsoft as well, they have, I hope people are familiar with they have an annual trends report for what's happening in cloud services and AI and whatnot. And they have consistently said that even with their Copilot, Microsoft's own Copilot, the AI assistant, about 55% of all of the Copilots out there have enabled more higher escalated privilege than is necessary for the role. And so having these type of automated policies and understanding and creating dynamically these policies on the fly when there is foreseen risk is the number one use case that people are seeing for automation, according to a couple of surveys I've seen.
No, that's a really good call out. And, I think it kind of reflects our polling question here. We asked, does your organization have both policies and tools in place to meet the new requirements? It looks like we've got 57% of respondents said somewhat, 29% came back as yes, and 14% with a no. So,
yeah. No surprise there. I mentioned AI recently, and just in general, just a kind of a one-off, but we're seeing that having an AI policy is about 30% of organizations in the public sector today that surprisingly have a known AI policy that is well communicated throughout the organization entity. And so that I think is pretty consistent with what we're seeing as well.
Yeah. So with that, human sounds good. It looks good, I hope, to everyone on the call. Let's talk a little bit about how it works. At its core, human is really focused on the idea of protect, detect, and comply. That's what our system is really set up to do. That's what our user workflows are set up to do. We really want to get you to that protected and compliant state as quickly as possible with as little effort as possible, because again, nobody has a surplus of IT and compliance people right now. There's not one organization that does. So human makes this very easy. We have what we like to refer to as a low code deployment. We use a single line of JavaScript deployed into your payment pages. That will then load whenever someone loads up the web page on a cell phone, a laptop, a desktop computer. Script activity will be collected at that point from the user's browser, right, from the client-side runtime. Those will be analyzed at our cloud backend. Any new scripts detected, script changes that are detected, script deletes, header modifications, all of that stuff will be surfaced in the human dashboard. And then on top of that, if there are any policy-based mitigations set up, in our example, we said block access to the credit card field, the card number fields. We will apply those mitigations as well, all from that single line of JavaScript code. So again, low code, easy to deploy, loads every single time someone interfaces with your site, and provides the precision level mitigation to be able to not only be alerted when a threat occurs, but block the damage of that threat. And then on top of that, we also have a number of enterprise integrations out of the box that are available. So you're not going to be stuck with humans workflow. We're going to adapt into your workflow and procedures that you've already got existing. So if you're managing this stuff through Slack or Jira or even simple email alerts, we can play nicely with that right out of the box. Same thing with more advanced workflows where maybe you're piping all of this out to a Splunk and combining it with other data sets, or even doing something completely custom and just pulling the raw data from our API. Bottom line, human can support all of these workflows so that you're not adapting to humans adapting to you. And don't take my word for it, because I actually have a human t-shirt on right now. I don't just work here. But some experts out at Coalfire are really saying that, hey, we kind of exceed the intent and spirit of PCI. And that's also reflected in some of our recent wins within the public sector, most namely, we're now securing the United States Postal Service from script-based attacks and helping them achieve DSS 4.0.1 compliance. But with that, Troy, maybe I hand it back over to you to talk about some key strategy.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up right before a question. This is the part I get excited about, because I've had a lot of conversations with different organizations throughout the years, including the United States Postal Service, who's been a member of PCI Council from time to time, and looking at what are the ways that we can achieve this, and not only do it once for PCI, but also for other type of regulatory requirements that we might have to meet. So Cameron, if we can go to the next slide. I always like to start with the analogy of going camping. So born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, I am 2 weeks away from hiking the Grand Canyon. And when you go on these long hikes, you can't be checking your supplies once you're already out into the forest, in my case, down in the Grand Canyon. And so you have to be doing these pre-evaluations, pre-assessment of, do you have all the material? Do you have an inventory of what you're going to be taking? And actually walk through laying it all out. So literally at this time, in the room next to my home office, is all of our camping gear laid out, because it'll be about 50-degree temperature swings, and we have to be accommodating just a very dynamic environment while we're down there. Same is true as always when you're doing a PCI DSS assessment. There should be early and often performing pre-assessment reviews. The environment is always changing. We have to recognize that you may be embracing a new payment processor. You may have new departments that are coming online and accepting payments for the first time, or some type of kiosk that is now part of your payment scope. So we have to be very aware of this. And one of the data points that I always like to point to, Poneman Institute has done it a couple of times. It's been many years, but others have reinforced this in surveys and studies, is that those that have done a PCI DSS assessment and do it internally 2 to 3, 4 times a year, they don't have so much deviation away from good PCI DSS practices. And overall, even though they are doing this additional legwork quarterly or more frequently, they are saving the overall GRC cost to achieve PCI DSS is 55% or more. And that's a significant savings on the overall compliance cost. The second, I've hit on it multiple times already, but I just have to really enforce, is to confirm the scope. Are we able to have an accurate and as small as possible scope for our payment environment? That really was one of the impetus for creating the PCI Council. And what we've always said is requirement 0. So if you open up the PCI standard, you will find that in the standard, we've always had a scoping section and segmentation section at the very beginning of the standard. And it really, while we don't mandate it as a requirement, we've always highly encouraged when I was at the PCI Council to minimize what are the nodes, what are the data points that you're going to have, either information itself or assets, technology that could influence that payment information and possibly expose it. So understanding that scope is accurate. And what you see with many of the advertised solutions out there today, especially for these new requirements of 643 and 1161, is say, oh, don't worry about scope. We'll handle it. We have all of the everything in place. And while maybe that will, if you're doing a small self-assessment questionnaire in your small retail business, that is an effective way to at least check the box that you are meeting the compliance requirement, but you're not necessarily meeting the spirit of the PCI DSS standard. The requirements have remained within the standard. There has to be a demonstration that the scope, again, is accurate. And that's where I think there's a lot of confusion at the moment. Probably more information coming from the PCI Council on clarifying how to assure that these requirements and that your service provider that you're using has demonstrated that your specific payment pages that they might be hosting are going to be secure from these type of attacks. Scope is incredibly important. The next is to communicate to the key stakeholders, finding PCI or other security regulatory champions, not just in the security department, not just in the IT department, but throughout the organization that can help encourage and teach and promote and maintain this awareness of this responsibility to protect payments. Then also make sure there's no surprises in inventory management. We see a lot of executive orders now that are emphasizing software bill of materials, know what type of software that you're leveraging. We should be seeing a lot of crypto bill of materials, know what type of cryptography you're using for, especially with quantum computing now becoming a reality probably in the next 5 years in commercial space. And so we're starting to see a need to have a very good, and in fact, it is requirements of PCI to understand what your inventory is and how do you manage it, both physically in requirement 9, physical management, as well as understanding where the data flows throughout the environment. And then finally, just making sure that the changes are consistently documented. That's where automation comes back in and being able to leverage solutions that are going to track as your third-party services, which probably at a minimum are in the hundreds, if not over 1,000 different SaaS providers and third-party sources or fourth-party sources you may not even know that you have. That's where that tracking of the management and being able to consistently document as those things change, as software is updated, you have a way to document that. And then on the next slide, Cameron, we got one more, just some steps that I would think were these specific requirements that I think are good tactical strategies to have. One is to define the e-commerce payment exclusively. A lot of times we focus on what is the overall payment data environment and really don't spend enough time on each channel and understanding where is the security risk for that channel, because skimming attacks and third-party malicious attempts to skim are not going to be the same as your in-person point of sale on the counter that a clerk might be using to accept a water bill or anything of that nature. So we have to be very conscious of that. And then deploy some client side. So this is outside of the traditional monitoring of an entity, but on the consumer side, the user side, having some type of defense across all of the web assets. You have in these requirements, as Cameron pointed out, you're having to monitor the HTTP headers, you're having to monitor the traffic that you're receiving. So making sure that you have some type of solution that can manage dynamically the script inventory. And then also test often the roles and permissions. I'll emphasize it again that the vast majority of cloud compromises, third-party compromises, are due to misconfigurations, and a lot of the misconfigurations come from allocating the wrong level of privileges to accounts, sharing accounts, things that are not supposed to be allowed in PCI, but still exist. It is the vast majority of compromises. all again are related to those roles and permissions. And review, again, scope. Scope is everything. It is requirement 0 of the standard. And then finally, just have two last ones: develop standard operating procedures. This includes the understanding what the pre-authorization response to if how things are modified, and blocking policies. And why that is so important is to have an SOP is because you're having all of these third-party sources. On average, the average e-commerce website has more than 100 different sources of code that all come together just to form the homepage, not even a complicated page, but the homepage of a website. So you have all these third-party sources that are constantly changing. What you don't want to do is have friction and disruption of that actual website. And so at times you are going to have to allow for some risk tolerance when new software source code is received. That's why what Cameron went through and looking at the priority of different changes and making sure that you allow for some of these, but that requires to have confidence in it to have a good SOP. And then finally, train specifically on the e-commerce channel. I can't say enough about, we see these security trainings where they're just very dry. They are sometimes resented by the general staff, where I think, again, Gen AI is going to be an incredible source for you. Is this is something you can put with ChatGPT today, is make security training relevant for the actual departments, relevant for your business. A lot of the PCI material that I helped write that is still written today was really focused on retail, on the commercial side, not as much on the public sector. What ChatGPT can, and Claude and Gemini even can do really well is create security training and scenarios that you can walk through. Say, here is our e-commerce channel in the public sector. Here's why it's important for us achieving PCI DSS. Here are the other implications and what we're trying to achieve more broadly with our security posture. And so highly encouraged, if you're not using it today, that is one area that I do think will become much. We talked about diversity and the personalization of use of AI. This is where I think in the security world, we're already seeing a lot of practical use cases already. And with that, I could ramble on a lot more, Cameron, but I think that's my last slide. And